Well, hello again. We are finally on chapter 13 of this book. This is in part 3, and it is called The Fallout. The endurance of George's legacy of secrecy has allowed her to harm many more than the thousands she directly touched. She's hurt every American adopted since the beginning of the falsification of adoptees' birth certificates. She hurt their birth parents, and she continues to hurt most of the 6 million adoptees and approximately 12 million birth parents alive today. She hurts them by keeping them apart, causing pain difficult for most of us to imagine. Elderly women speaking of having thought of their relinquished children every single day. They cry when they talk of their missing children. Adoptees suffer too and spend enormous energy imagining the parents who bore them. I remember looking at faces in the crowds, wondering if I might be looking at my mother without knowing it. I recalled an adoptee interviewed, as were the next 5 adoptees quoted by Annette Barron and Ruben Panor for The Adoption Triangle. I was forever running into people who would start conversations with, "Do you have relatives in Rochester or Duluth or Denver? You look just like someone I know there." I'd answer as calmly as possible, "Not that I know of, but who is it?" I wonder if my natural mother thinks of me. I occasionally look at people driving by. If anyone looks like me, I wonder if it might be a brother or a sister. I once thought that my mother's best friend was my birth mother because of a resemblance to her. I used to cry and look in the mirror and wonder if my mother looked like me. When I tried to visualize her, I did not picture her as a princess, nor did I picture her as a streetwalker. I did not care who she was. All I knew was that I had to find her. I used to fantasize about my birth mother being a whore or an alcoholic and telling me to get lost. Then I'd think about her being rich and prominent and explaining it all to me, taking me in her arms and holding me. I suppose it was natural that I would look at it from all angles. Ooh, I did that. Despite having an open adoption, I definitely looked at things from all angles, although I will say that it was mainly about my birth father. And as I got older, and as I was telling you guys, knowing his problematic behavior and alcoholism and drug use and all that, the more I feared him finding me. And although I've reached out for answers, I don't physically want to meet him. All I want are my answers, right? But there's something in me, even though I'm in my 30s, that is afraid that he and or my brother, my older brother, will just suddenly show up, and it's like, I want to say they like blame me for something. I can't explain it very well, but there's just something innate in that. Okay, continuing on. I pictured my birth mother as an earthy, sensuous, laughing, affectionate person in contrast to my adoptive mother, who was confident, practical, matter-of-fact, but not very warm. In actuality, I believe I wanted to be like my birth mother fantasy. Briefly enamored of the soap opera General Hospital, my daughter once asked if her favorite actor might be her birth father. When she said this, I thought of one of our former neighbors, 13-year-old Martha, who lived directly across the street from us in Grand Island, New York. Martha, too, had been adopted, and like Beth, then an infant, had pale skin, light eyes, and dark hair. Martha remarked upon their resemblance, and during her second visit, ventured that she and Beth might be biological sisters. I knew that Beth's mother was too young to have borne Martha, but I couldn't bring myself to say so. Martha wanted to believe it, wanted what we who haven't been adopted take for granted. Of course, George's legacy deprives adoptees not only of the sense of connection Martha craved, but knowledge of their medical histories. There are over 3,000 illnesses that are passed through genes, I read in a book on adoption. Regarding their own futures, adoptees can rule none out. Ooh, that hits, because yes, the amount of testing I've had to go through, and still have to go through, and many other adoptees, right, to figure things out is ridiculous. So what I was saying was that we don't have access to our medical history, right? And although I know some people would be like, well, I'm not adopted and I don't have, information. Here's the thing. You legally can get information that we cannot. We are legally severed from our medical history, except I believe in New York now. The thing is that if you grow up anywhere within your family, you kind of know sort of what's going on. You kind of know, like, hey, grandpa had a heart attack at age 50, right? Or something like that. Or for me, I deal with lupus and fibro. Is there history of that in my family? I don't know. Whereas with my adoptive parents, it's like, okay, I know more about the medical history of my adoptive parents, right, than I do my own. And so as I'm, sorry, I shouldn't be laughing. I'm about to go through surgery. And one of the things that frightens me, even though we're not biologically related, is my adoptive mother has issues with her liver. She said it was cysts on the liver, but there was a lot of complications. Anyway, as I'm about to go through my surgery, one of the things that my surgeon is like, well, we want to shrink your liver as small as possible so we have a better outcome. And it frightened me, right? Because I'm like, first of all, I know the hell that my adoptive mother went through. She ended up in a coma at one point a couple years ago because of complications from her liver surgeries. And even though I'm not biologically related, I'm like, holy hell, let me shrink this as, small as possible, because I don't know the history. I have maybe a little bit of it from my mother's side, my biological mother. I really, other than being alcoholics and drug addicts, I don't really know anything about the medical history of my father's side, right? And so every time we go to the doctor as adoptees, and it happens with my kid too, right? Like, people ask, like, oh, like, what's the medical history? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm adopted. And like, I really don't have information on my son's father either. He can answer that, but he's not around. That's, again, a whole different thing. But it's like, I don't have any information, like, at all. And this really is detrimental. And yes, this does affect kids who don't know their biological parents. More so could be in foster care, could be a guardianship. This could still happen in kinship care if they're not told the right things, right? So I want to make it clear, and step parents too. This happens in step parent adoptions as well. Like, you're legally severed from that parent. And it's important to remember, and I know people are like, oh my God, but adoption's beautiful. Yeah, not really when you're an adoptee and you lose all this important information. And so when we talk about adoptions, especially when it's not our choice and we don't fully understand things, it's like they don't fully understand. So like the other day, I was scrolling through something and I saw that the LeBrant family, which, by the way, not fans of family channels, okay? But I saw that, I think it was Everly was adopted by Cole. So now she's a step-parent adoptee, right? They're like, happy adoption day. Now, I get it. She knew her biological father. He passed away and things like that. But all I could think of was, this little girl who's about the same age as my child has no idea about the long-term implications this is going to have. That is not to say that she doesn't love Cole or Cole doesn't love her, that he's, hasn't stepped up, of course. But to legally adopt her when you've already been through, you've already really stepped up, right? Just made me think of all of the legal severing that she will then have to face to get any information on her dad's side of the family, right? And I'm just talking vital statistics. I don't know that much about how connected she is with her dad's side of the family, and if she gets to see her grandparents and all that, right? But that just made me think about it, like the future that she may have to go through as a step-parent adoptee. Things that her siblings will never have to face because they share the same parents, right? Things that her parents don't have to face because I believe neither one of them had a step-parent adoption, right? Or adopted, period. And so while on the outside, looking in like, oh yeah, like, oh, it's beautiful, like she finally has the same full last name and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just thinking, y'all don't know the complications and hell that we've had to go through. So just saying. Anyway, continuing on. The following four adoptees spoke of their concern to the authors of The Adoption Triangle. I worried about my health. I had no idea what diseases I might have inherited from my biological parents. I have an intense fear of dying at a young age. I wish I knew the lifespan of my biological relatives. Adoptees also worry about unknowingly passing on genetically based diseases to their children. I'm very interested in my family heritage. I feel quite deprived not knowing my true ancestry, and I feel that in the future my children have the right to know their heritages. My husband is also adopted. Thus, both of us have no lineage. I have discovered that I have myoclonic epilepsy, and I am very concerned about bringing any more children into the world and what I may have passed on to the children I already have. Had I known when I married that I am epileptic or that there was epilepsy in my family, I might have chosen never to have children rather than risk the risk of passing it on to future generations. Testifying before a legislative committee in 2006, attorney and reunited birth father Fred Greenman asked committee members to remember what happens when you visit a new doctor. You are questioned about your family's health history, either orally or by a questionnaire. Is your father alive? If so, what is the state of his health? If he is dead, how old was he? And what caused his death? The same questions for your mother and siblings. Typically, the doctor will also ask you whether any of your blood relatives had any number of specific illnesses, such as diabetes, heart disease, cancer, stroke, kidney disease, allergies, thyroid disease. It's a long list. Doctors don't ask these questions out of idle curiosity. They know the answers may be crucial to both diagnosis and treatment. When a typical adoptee is asked these important questions, their only answer is, I don't know. I swear. I know someone has a shirt out there that says, I'm adopted. I don't know is the answer. We really need these shirts to go to the doctor because it's ridiculous. And I will say that having gone through the incredible amount of doctor's appointments, not only in the last year leading up to the surgery, but prior, and even with the same doctors and providers, I still have to get these, questions answered, and then I have to answer them for my kid too, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know her family history. I'm adopted. It just sucks. It just sucks. Anyway, Greenman cited the effect of this lack of knowledge on an adoptee in his 20s who had a persistent stomachache for several days, which he ignored until his wife prevailed upon him to go to the hospital. The stomachache was a coronary attack. He dropped dead on the steps to the hospital. The cardiologist concluded that his coronary weakness was probably genetic. Had he known his family history, he might well still be alive. Depriving adoptees of knowledge of their health histories seems particularly criminal today, when prophylactic measures are available to people who have inherited genetic variations predisposing them to serious diseases such as cancer. But no matter how important knowledge of their past is for adoptees, it is frequently denied them, a fact that they learn very young. Some of the kids at school used to make a big production out of it, said a 12-year-old boy interviewed for How It Feels to Be Adopted by Jill Krementz. We're also going to put that on the list to read. Okay. They'd ask me a lot of questions like, are you adopted? And I'd say yes. Then they'd ask me if I'd like to know who my real parents are. And I'd say, sure. Then they'd say, well, you can't. I'd ask them why, and they'd tell me, you're not allowed to. That's why. So that's when I really found out about the law and the adoption records being sealed. It's also, like we were saying earlier in this book, it's also a societal thing. People really think that birth parents want to stay private, and that well, not just the law, but people really think oh, you don't need to, oh, you have your real parents, right? As if we have fake parents, but your real parents didn't want you, they didn't love you enough. And then on the other side we get, they loved you so much they gave you up, relinquished. And we get these mixed messages, and so we really do equate love with abandonment. Even when our biological parents have the best intentions, we're coerced, manipulated, going through hell, fought. And I'm saying this isn't all stories, right? But even with open adoptions, a lot of us still feel that abandonment, right? That trauma. Yeah. But also, I really, really hate when the people say, well, your real parents. I just look at them did I have fake parents? I have two sets of parents. I have my biological and I have my adopted. It doesn't make either one of them less than. Right? I had parents that gave me my DNA, and I have parents and my culture and, genes and all that. And then I have parents who who raised me. Does not make my biological parents less than. But only the adoptee gets to decide that. And I want to make that clear. Only the adoptee gets to decide who the quote-unquote real parents are. Okay, continuing on. I think kids who are adopted should be allowed to know who their original parents are. Sadly, relatively few of the adoptees who want to search for their past do so. Some are deterred by the difficulty of searching in a country with sealed records, and many are reluctant to upset their adoptive parents, who directly or indirectly often make adoptees aware that they don't want them to search. Some adoptive parents even threaten to disown adoptees who search for their birth parents. Adoptees often delay searching until their adoptive parents have died, only to find out that their birth parents are by then dead too. Fortunately, increasing numbers of adoptive parents are beginning to respect their children's needs. Understanding them requires little but thought. I recall telling a friend about Beth's desire to find her mother. As was often the case, he was hurt for me, assuming Beth's search to be criticism of my parenting. A relative of his, he said, had adopted 2 children. The girl was fine and had absolutely no need to search. The boy, who needed to rebel, ran away and was now estranged from his adoptive parents. Okay, I'm just going to make an observation. I often hear that, but I usually hear the opposite. It's usually the boy who is quote unquote fine and doesn't want to search, and it's the girl who wants to search and does all that. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying that's my observation from what I hear as an educator and fellow adoptee. So, yeah. Anyway, Beth and I have a good relationship, I said. She simply needs to know. It's a separate issue. Then he said. Okay, I also want to say that, and I've told a little bit of my story throughout these readings. My parents have always been open with me, right? My adoptive parents. My adoptive mother told me she told me from the beginning, but she told me that before she even brought me home, she would pretend that she was holding a baby in the mirror and practice saying, "You're adopted," right? She never hid anything from me, neither one of my parents. They were always, and like even into, they're both in their late 70s and I'm in my 30s, my almost mid 30s. And they have still been very accepting. I know that when I went through a phase of, hold on. Okay, sorry, another phone call. So what I was saying was my adoptive parents were always open. They never hid anything. They showed me pictures. They told me where they were from. They told me about their cultures as much as they could, like what they knew. I know that my adoptive mom feels guilty because she thinks that she lied to me because of something that my paternal grandmother had said. Although my paternal grandmother was the one that was lying, so everything that I already knew was not actually a lie. That's complicated. But my adoptive parents were always very open about me refinding my biological mother when she disappeared, right? About me knowing my biological family, about me knowing my cultures, specifically my indigenous side, which I was very, and still very interested in and attached to and have a better connection with than the others. They never hid that, right? And one of the things that I've talked to my adoptive parents about was they were so secure in their relationship and their knowledge that they are still my parents, right? No matter what, they are still going to be my parents. But they really did want the best interest of me, right, as their child. And they read all the books, some of the books that we've been reading, not this one because this one is pretty recent, but all the books that were out, before 1991 when I was adopted. They went to the AFFCNY conference, which was part of the parents committee, the Adoptive Parents Committee, which is no longer around. They just recently dissolved, but they would partner up with the AFFCNY at the time. So the conferences were in Albany, and they went to those. They even took me. So I actually have very fond memories going in person to these conferences. They went to the meetings every month, so I was always surrounded by fellow adoptees. There was just such a great support group. My parents had children's book focused on adoption. Although I will say that some of them I'm kind of iffy about because they were written by adoptive parents. Now looking back, I as a child didn't have an issue, right? My parents, I will say I personally don't remember at the time, but my mother had told me as well that there was a time where I did go to an adoption competent therapist when I was quite young, and it was kind of during the time where I was I guess 7 or 8, and it was around the time that I just decided that I didn't want contact with my bio mom at that moment, right? This is right around the time where she explained my birth mother was very understanding. And then after that, there must have been a flood and she lost her information. This is where I'm like, really? Like, okay, you lost her information, but like, I was pretty easy to find. Like, in my case, right, having a very unique name, my parents never moved. There's literally one of my family in the entire like country, still is. So you got to think about that. Like our phone numbers never changed. My dad literally still has the same email. Okay, we're talking AOL. My dad never graduated. We had that number until 2021, and we had that address as well until 2021. So like I'm well into my, like I was in my 30s at that point. I just turned 30. So there was really no excuse, in my opinion, and I still hold this true, right? Even though we've talked about it, I really just felt like maybe she just, I'm not trying to make excuses for her. I don't know. Like, there's just something about it. Like, there's just, in my opinion, no excuse for her not to try to reach back out. But it wasn't until I was 17 that, like, my parents had searched off and on for her again. And then it was when I was 17, I had skipped my senior year and went to college, that I started searching. And although my adoptive parents have always been very open and willing to help, at that time, that was just like my rebel stage. I didn't want their help. Like, I don't know if I felt ashamed, but I started searching and I can't explain it. I just didn't want them to help. Anyway, one reason given by adoptees for seeking their birth parents is to assure them that they are alive, happy, and accomplished. When Beth was very young, she fantasized about her mother viewing her. Beth was not ready to see her mother herself. She would be behind a one-way mirror, such as those used in police stations, so that she could be viewed but could not see her mother. Beth would be performing gymnastics. I want her to know how strong I am, she said. Years later, I heard a similar wish from Georgia Tann adoptee interviewed by Mike Wallace for 60 Minutes. Stolen along with her sister and two brothers when she was 4, Pat Sholtor, we're going to look up her name, we'll find that video, had searched for her parents as an adult, only to find they died. She had no choice, said Mike Wallace, to show her mother and father what kind of person she grew up to be. It was really important to me, Pat said, to let our parents know that I turned out okay, because I felt like as much as I have hurt, I feel like they've hurt too. So my gift to them would be, she continued, fighting back tears, I'm a very successful businesswoman. I feel something to be proud of. I was told that, during the taping, Mike Wallace's eyes were moist too. Some of the difficulties regarding adoption are inherent. A child is separated from her birth parents, parents from their child. That will always hurt. Adoptions that aren't necessary, such as many of those arranged by Georgia Tann and many involving her indirect victims in the 1950s and 60s and even today, should not occur. Adoptions that are necessary should be as painless as possible. Much of the anguish of American adoptees could be alleviated by knowledge. Their right to this seems obvious. As the 12-year-old boy interviewed for How It Feels to Be Adopted said, laws sealing adoptees' records are ridiculous. Okay, first of all, I want to make a note. We have an adoptive parent / journalist who is writing this. Saying that much of the anguish of American adoptees could be alleviated by knowledge, there are just some things, even with knowing this, through open adoptions, it doesn't take away the pain. It really doesn't. Now, how everyone deals with that pain will differ. Adoption, whether necessary or not, and yes, majority of them are unnecessary, are going to be you're going through an inherently traumatic event. How each one has a trauma response to it and feels about it will differ, right? There are the 4 main trauma responses: fawn, fight, flight, and freeze. Now, some adoptees don't recognize that the separation and or abandonment that they feel is linked to their adoption. That's totally okay. I'm not going to say they're in the fog. It is what it is. Some do not recognize that a lot of their problems, their responses, that the signs/symptoms within these 4, like I said, fight, flight, fawn, and freeze, are linked to their adoption, right? Again, totally okay. So some may say that, oh, I don't feel this way. It had nothing to do with my adoption, not truly recognizing it. Again, totally fine, right? Some do recognize it and say, hey, I've dealt with this. I'm okay. I'm good, right? I've had other things happen, and that's more important in my life to deal with. Again, totally okay. But to say that much of the anguish of American adoptees could be alleviated by knowledge, just to me shows that this adoptive parent is still in the fog. And we've talked about this in earlier chapters. Thinking that, and maybe it's my perspective as someone with an open adoption, right? And seeing and speaking with adoptees from all various walks of life, to have a lot of this knowledge that most don't, and still understand the pain, right? I'm trying to put the word for it. I don't think it really does alleviate. Does it help out of curiosity? Sure. But will it really get rid of the maternal separation and abandonment issues? No. While we are the victims of circumstance and trafficking and whatever you want to call it, this adoption industry, right? It is our responsibility to work on our healing. And for me, my thought on that is not only being educated in all of this, right? Going through therapy, again, I do absolutely recommend an adoption competent therapist, or one that is very well versed in adoption trauma. And there are a variety of types of therapy. Having support groups with fellow adoptees, having that connection. I would even go as far as advocating, right? A lot of people who begin to understand all this, even like they were saying back in the 30s and the 40s, began to advocate against adoption, right? Adoptees who didn't have nearly as much information about and access that we do today were advocating against adoption because they saw the harms happening, the same harms that we continue to face today. And, I kind of laughed and the haha ironic, but I almost want to make it my complete life's mission to undo everything Georgia Tann does. Like, hey, I was born to the day 100 years after her birth, okay? To the day 100 years after she was born. Granted, she was dead at 60, right? Or 59, whatever it was. She was born July 18th, 1891. I was born July 18th, 1991. I want to make it my life's mission to undo her legacy. Now, can I do that alone? No. Did she work alone to create this legacy? No. So, do I have to be the face of it? Of course not. I'm not like that. I don't give a fuck. I just want the change. I want to see better for fellow adoptees. That is the importance. And there are many fellow adoptees who are doing just that, working in different parts, whether it's state or federally, or going, working as social workers, writing books, having discussions, doing movies or documentaries and all of this. And I think that's wonderful. Like, no matter what you're doing, we can still make a little bit of time to continue to advocate for our community, our group, ourselves. It could be 5 minutes a day. It could be doing a video or doing a post on social media, whatever it may be. It could be reading a book a month, right? Or a book a year that you talk about. There's just so many ways to go about it. And I think that's really important. And like I was saying, one step is to work on your own healing as well, right? I can absolutely be completely angry and upset about the entire system. And trust me, if you had seen me 5-6 years ago, I was a completely different person. Not just because 5-6 years ago, have gone by, but just even my mindset, my knowledge, my attitude. I used to yell, if you guys know me, I used to yell into my phone on TikTok, like on videos, and just be so angry at everyone. And now I'm like, that really wasn't helpful, and it wasn't helping me, and it wasn't helping my family, and it really just seeped into my life. And like, yes, it's okay to be angry, but how you express it could be vastly different. Channeling that energy into elsewhere is going to be more productive, right? Okay. Continuing on. They seem ridiculous to many adoptees. They seem ridiculous to many who have researched the issue, but adoptees are, despite their number, a minority. Few members of the general public are aware that adoption records are sealed. Closed, like locked up, people have asked me at parties. Didn't that change long ago? I was a novice at activism and felt a fraud. I'd always understood my daughter's need to search for her mother, and once I discovered Georgia Tan's role in adoption, I became even more aware of the rightness of Beth's search. But the mind and the heart are not always in sync. Like Georgia's clients, I feared that if my daughter found her mother, I would lose her. Okay, see, that is exactly what I was talking about. You as an adoptive parent have to be secure. You have to go through therapy yourself, something that my adoptive parents did, infertility therapy, family therapy, adoption competent therapist. Like, understand you are still I'm going to say it, you're her paper mom, but to her, you are still mom, right? And being accepting, right? Being encouraging, being open, and just letting her lead will help create a better connection. And often I hear of fellow adoptees talking about such a lack of all that, right? The lack of security, the lack of openness, the lack of well treatment and support, that when they become adults, they then go no contact, right? And I hear from adoptive parents like, oh, my kid had, reactive attachment disorder, right? Like adoption causes, but let me make this clear. RAD is really a messed up diagnosis. It really should not be a thing, and it puts the blame on the child instead of understanding that the child went through a traumatic event, right? And so all I hear are parents that are doing just that, like, oh yeah, it, like, my kid has rad, like, they're a horrible kid. Like, the way that people talk about their children online, show me, in my opinion, if you're this open about trashing your child online, what are you doing behind closed doors? No, that also doesn't mean that those that are praising their child can't be also harmful. I mean, no parent is perfect, but I just always wonder. Anyway, but I knew Beth loved me, and I'd seen her mother in her hospital room 2 days after she'd given birth, young, embarrassed, and so sad I had to look away. Her lawyer had told me she'd be moving on, as if she'd be able to forget Beth. And I'd tried to comfort Beth during her early childhood when she cried and asked, how can I know she loved me? I knew I tried to reunite Beth with her mother, and so I was so grateful to members of a local support group, Adoption Network Cleveland, and to the thousands of other people across the country who were fighting to make such reunions possible. A critical battle regarding this, one I'd been following for several years, was being waged in Tennessee. By the time my daughter decided to search for her mother in 1996, adoptees and their advocates were taking their fight to the Tennessee legislature. 3 years earlier, the Tennessee Coalition for Adoption Reform, headed by Denny Glad, and adoptee Caprice East had persuaded the Tennessee governor and legislator to appoint an 11-member commission to study the state's adoption laws. Its most prominent member was Bob Tuch, an adoption attorney and adoptive father. Caprice East and Denny Glad were also members. The study commission held town meetings across Tennessee. Scores of Georgia Tan's adoptees and scores of her indirect victims testified to their need to know their identities and past. Wow. I'd actually like to, I wonder if we can get access to that. That would be really great to see if we could get access to that, right? Because I think even that, like, we could still get a lot of adoptees to testify, right? The more that we have backing our change, even if it's small changes, right? Small changes can lead to bigger changes. And the more that we stand up, and this goes for any social movement, activism, advocacy, etc., right? The more voices that we have, the better off we're heard. And it doesn't have to be the direct or indirect victims heard. It could be people that, like I was telling you guys, the uncle that I had reached out to who helped me find my birth mom, my adoption affected him so much. His wife couldn't have, he and his wife couldn't have biological kids. So they just chose to be childless, right? Because of how the adoption affected him. And he told me this when I first, contacted him. And while he and my mother had a very, they went no contact, other than him reaching out to her about me, she didn't know this until after he died, right? She didn't know because there's something so shameful about it. Like, I could only imagine that he didn't want to tell her because he felt that she would blame herself, right? And I'm sure she did. People don't understand that it doesn't just direct the birth mother and or birth father, that it affects the grandparents, it affects aunts and uncles, it affects cousins, it affects the adoptee, right? It could affect the neighbors, the other kids. Like, you don't fully know who it's going to affect, right? And their connection to adoption. But, I've heard a story of someone local to me where she was a kinship adoptee. She didn't find out until her mother was on her deathbed. She was adopted by her biological mother's sister, so it was technically her aunt, but this was her mom, right? And she lived in a small town at the time of her adoption. Majority of the town was her family, but everyone in the town knew of her adoption. Everyone except her. And to me, I'm thinking I would never want to talk to anyone again because nobody felt necessary. Nobody wanted to tell her the truth, and everyone kept a secret. And it's those family secrets that is going to destroy you, that's going to destroy trust, right? We have to be the cycle breakers, whether that means not drinking, not doing drugs, getting healthy and fit, maybe moving out of the area because of issues, right? Changing jobs. I know it's not genetic, but sorry, a little bit of a story here. When my cousin Josh, who's also adopted, he was doing more research on my adoptive mom's side. So his adoptive mother's side and my adoptive mother's side, right? Because we're the ones that do genealogy in our family, ironically. The two adoptees and then grandma, who has since passed, but we were the closest to her other than her biological. We as adoptees were closer to grandma over the biological grandkids, which is ironic. Anyway, he was doing research and he found more family members that had escaped World War II and went from Poland and Ukraine to, I believe it was France. So one side went to America, one side, I guess, had ended up in France. And he was saying that it's really ironic looking at everyone and looking at even their careers and how much a lot of them resemble our side of the family. That there's social workers, that there's lawyers, that there's doctors, right? And that a lot of them have animals, especially cats, right? And like how each person reflects that. And there's also been a study of this with twins that have been separated. I know that like Criminal Minds and SVU have done what do you call it? Episodes on this, but there's been actual studies on this, and I'm gonna link this back to adoption. There is a documentary called The Three Identical Strangers, and I will say Mr. Ballin has told this story on his channel early on, a couple years ago, when he first got started. But this is a true story. Again, there's an actual documentary of this. These triplets were adopted into different families. So one was in a more lower class family, one in a middle class, and one in an upper class. And the agency specifically did this and didn't want anyone to know that they were linked to, this was out of New York City, by the way. They didn't want anyone to know that they had siblings. And this agency was doing the study, and they, unlike most agencies, they would go and check in on the kids and see how they were doing and all that. And it wasn't until college that they discovered all of this, because one of the triplets ended up going to the same college that one of his brothers were, and he was called his brother's name, but they were like, no way, like, we didn't think you were coming back. And that's when they learned that they were twins, and then they later found out, because the families went to the adoption agency, found out that there were triplets, and there was a whole big thing, right? Like, anyway, I highly recommend you not just listen to the whole story, because I'm not even I'm just giving a very quick summary of it, but watch the documentary and how these boys, these men, they're in their 60s now, I think, or 70s, maybe even 50s, but they're much older than me. How they talk about it, how they talked about how they grew up, and the even though that they were placed in different homes and loved their adoptive parents, how they all ended up living basically the same exact life in different class, like lower class, middle class, upper class, and how it really affected them long term. Anyway, tomorrow we will be reading chapter 14, the end of the beginning, and I will see you then.